Just after midnight on December 3, 1984, a farmer named M.A. Khan woke to strange sounds outside his home near a pesticide plant in Bhopal, India. Two of his cows were already dead on the ground. A third let out a groan and collapsed as he watched. Then his own eyes began to burn. He ran into the darkness. He later told a reporter he thought a plague had come to the city. Within hours, thousands of Khan's neighbors were dead or dying. What happened that night is now considered the worst industrial disaster in history. This account is based on Union Carbide's internal safety survey and the company's investigation into the cause of the leak. It also draws on the federal court record from the case Union Carbide fought for 2 years to keep out of the United States. Most videos on this disaster stop at the leak itself. Mine doesn't. Stick with me to the end, because there's a document I'm going to put on screen, and once you see it, you're not going to look at this story the same way. Union Carbide built the Bhopal plant in 1969 to manufacture pesticides for the Indian market. In 1979, the company added a unit to produce methyl isocyanate on site, a chemical known as MIC. MIC does not need to be inhaled in large quantities to kill. A few drops on your skin will cause burns. It also reacts violently with water. That reaction releases heat and gas far faster than most containment systems are built to handle. The plant stored its MIC in 3 underground tanks, each holding tens of thousands of liters. Union Carbide told regulators and the public that these tanks had plant backup safety systems that make a major leak essentially impossible. By the early 1980s, the plant was losing money. Pesticide sales in India had dropped as farmers switched to cheaper alternatives, and Union Carbide's own management had already discussed selling it. Staffing was cut to match. The crew running the MIC unit went from 12 workers to 6. The maintenance crew for that same unit went from 6 workers to 2. Safety training for new operators was cut from 6 months to 15 days. Housing for the shantytowns that had grown up along the plant's boundary was never addressed. Thousands of people were living close enough to the tanks to die in their sleep. At around 11 at night on December 2, 1984, workers noticed liquid leaking near the plant's MIC unit. A supervisor looked at it, decided it was only water, and said he would deal with it after his tea break. It was not water. Investigators would later conclude that several hundred liters of water had entered storage tank 610, which held more than 40 tons of liquid MIC. Water was never supposed to reach that tank under normal operation. Once inside, it triggered a runaway chemical reaction, and the reaction generated heat and pressure far beyond what the tank was built to hold. By 11 that night, a control room operator noticed the tank's pressure gauge reading higher than normal. It was still inside the tank's rated limit, so no alarm was raised. By 1:15 midnight, gas was escaping into the plant itself. Pressure kept climbing. An operator went outside and heard the tank groaning, then a screeching sound from its safety valve, and felt heat radiating off the metal. Every safety system built to stop exactly this kind of failure had already been taken out of service. The refrigeration unit that was supposed to keep MIC cold enough to slow any reaction had been shut off months earlier, to save money. The gas scrubber, meant to neutralize escaping gas with a caustic soda spray, would not switch on. A control room operator tried the pump anyway. It did not respond. The flare tower, the last line of defense, meant to burn off any gas that got past the scrubber, was down for maintenance and missing a section of pipe. Around 1 in the morning, the tank's safety valve gave way, and methyl isocyanate began pouring into the night air as a dense, heavier-than-air cloud. It drifted south and west, over the shantytowns along the plant's boundary, and into the sleeping city beyond. Accounts differ on exactly when the public alarm sounded and for how long. They agree on the substance. The siren that was supposed to warn the city sounded too late. When it did sound, it was largely indistinguishable from the drill sirens the plant ran roughly 20 times a week for practice. Few residents who heard it understood what it meant. Panic broke out inside the plant as well. Most of the roughly 100 workers on site fled. One employee, Shakil Ahmed, stayed behind trying to fight the leak and collapsed from gas exposure before he could do anything about it. By the time engineers from an outside company arrived to seal the tank, nearly an hour after the leak began, all the gas had already escaped. The cloud reached Bhopal's railway station within minutes, where homeless residents were sleeping on the platforms in the winter cold. Dozens died where they lay. Across the city, more than 500,000 people were exposed before the sun came up. At Bhopal's main hospital, the first patients with burning eyes arrived a little after 1 in the morning. By dawn, the hallways were full of the dead and dying. Doctors treating them had never heard of methyl isocyanate. They were initially told that the gas might be ammonia, then phosgene. It took hours to learn what had actually been in the cloud. The Madhya Pradesh state government's original count, filed in the disaster's immediate aftermath, listed 3,787 deaths. A government affidavit filed with India's Supreme Court more than 2 decades later put the toll far higher. Independent public health researchers who have studied the case for years argue the true number is higher still, once deaths from long-term exposure are counted. Several 100,000 more people were left injured. Many are still suffering today. Union Carbide's own explanation for how that water got into Tank 610 is a public document. So is the safety report the company's own engineers wrote about that exact plant, 2.5 years before the leak. In the aftermath, 2 competing explanations emerged for how the water reached Tank 610. Union Carbide's own investigation concluded that a disgruntled employee had deliberately introduced the water as an act of sabotage, a position the company maintained publicly for decades. Independent investigators, including India's Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, reached a different conclusion. They pointed to routine maintenance, a pipe washing operation performed without the valves properly isolated, letting water travel where it was never supposed to go. That is close to the exact kind of failure the plant's own safety audit had already flagged 2 years earlier. Victims and the Indian government tried to bring Union Carbide to trial in a New York federal court. In 1986, Judge John Keenan dismissed the case, ruling it belonged in Indian courts instead, a forum Union Carbide itself had argued for. The case moved to India. Civil claims would not be resolved for another 3 years, and criminal charges would take far longer than that. Warren Anderson was Union Carbide's chairman and chief executive at the time. Company policy required he be notified of any serious injury or death at a Carbide facility. A Bhopal worker had already died in a gas accident at the same plant in December 1981, 3 years before the disaster. Tyson led the team of American engineers Union Carbide sent to audit the Bhopal plant in May 1982, the report that would carry his name into the historical record. Rajkumar Keswani was a local Bhopal journalist who spent 9 months in 1982 investigating conditions inside the plant before publishing a series of public warnings. Suman Day was the control room operator on duty the night of the leak. He was the man who tried and failed to start the gas scrubber as the tank's pressure climbed past the point of no return. Anderson flew to Bhopal 4 days after the leak and was arrested on arrival. He spent about 6 hours in custody. Local officials then released him on bail of 25,000 rupees, worth around $500 at the time, and had him flown to Delhi on a government aircraft. He left India 2 days later and never returned. In 1989, a Bhopal court declared him an absconder and issued a non-bailable arrest warrant. India requested his extradition from the United States in 2003. The request was denied in 2004. Anderson died in the United States in September 2014, 30 years after the leak, having never faced an Indian court. In February 1989, Union Carbide and the Indian government reached a full and final civil settlement, $470 million, covering all claims arising from the disaster. Divided among the hundreds of thousands of people the government itself classified as injured, victims' advocates calculated the payout at a few $100s per claim. The criminal case moved far more slowly. In June 2010, 26 years after the leak, a Bhopal court convicted 7 former Union Carbide India executives, none of them American, of causing death by negligence. Each was sentenced to 2 years in prison and a small fine. The verdict came a quarter-century after the disaster and named no one above the level of the Indian subsidiary. It was widely condemned in India as disproportionate to what had happened. Union Carbide's American parent company and its executives were never tried in India at all. Here is what the documented record shows that most accounts of this disaster leave out. In May of 1982, 2.5 years before the leak, Union Carbide sent its own team of American safety engineers to Bhopal, led by C.S. Tyson. Their report was blunt. It documented 61 hazards at the plant. 30 were classified as major. 11 were specifically inside the MIC and phosgene units, the exact systems that would fail in 1984. The report warned in writing of a potential for the release of toxic materials and a possible runaway reaction. It named the cause in advance: equipment failure, operating problems, or maintenance problems. It described leaking valves. It described filter cleaning operations performed without proper isolation, the same kind of procedure investigators would later identify as the likely route the water took into Tank 610. The Tyson Report was not filed and forgotten. It was sent directly to Union Carbide's management committee in the United States. Here is the part almost never told. Union Carbide operated a second plant using the same MIC process in Institute, West Virginia. Following that same 1982 audit, the company carried out remedial fixes at the West Virginia plant. The identical hazards, identified by the identical audit, were addressed at the American facility and left standing at the Indian one. This was not a warning that failed to reach the right people. It reached them. It was read, filed, and acted on 3,000 miles from the people it was actually meant to protect. A second warning came from entirely outside the company. Beginning in September 1982, 4 months after the Tyson Report, local journalist Rajkumar Keswani published a series of increasingly direct articles in a small Bhopal weekly. The first ran under a Hindi headline that translates to "Save Please, Save This City." Days later came a second, translating to "Bhopal Sitting on the Brink of a Volcano." His final piece, published 5 months before the leak, translates to "Bhopal on the Brink of a Disaster." Keswani had spent 9 months building his case using internal manuals and reports obtained from 2 employees who had recently lost their jobs at the plant. His warnings were specific, and they were public. They changed nothing. 2 warnings existed. One came from inside Union Carbide's own engineering division in writing with a named author, and it produced action at a sister plant on another continent. The other came from a local reporter, in print, in the city where the danger actually was, and it produced nothing at all. The Bhopal site was never fully cleaned up. Contamination from the plant reached local groundwater, and the surrounding area remained an active environmental and legal dispute for decades. As recently as January 2025, more than 300 tons of hazardous waste were still being removed from the property for disposal, more than 40 years after the leak. In early 2026, the Madhya Pradesh state government announced plans for a memorial at the now-cleared site. A warning does not fail because the people who received it didn't understand the danger. It fails when the cost of fixing it in one place is judged worth paying, and the cost of fixing it somewhere else is judged not to be. The Tyson Report's findings, Union Carbide's own account of the water in Tank 610, and the court's full opinion are all public documents. I've linked each one below.